What's up, NIO family? It's Rey-Jay back with another video. And in this one, I want to break down what's happening with NIO, Tesla, SPY, and the overall markets. I'm going to talk about the big earnings that are coming out, as we're going to be looking for some high volatility because of that. Not to mention more data coming out for tomorrow, which is going to cause a bigger move. But just note that I am not a financial planner, so take nothing I say as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out my Webull link. If you deposit any amount of money, you're guaranteed at 12 free stocks. If you deposit $500 or more, you're guaranteed 20, and deposit $2,000 or more, you're guaranteed 40. The offer ends tomorrow, so check it out before they run out. Anyways, now let's talk about what's happening with NIO. Looking at NIO, we got this nice little pump up to this 6.2 area just yesterday. And I mentioned to everyone that if we get a rejection, we're looking for a move back down to these EMAs. And if we manage to hold above 6, we're going to be remaining more bullish. So I did give you guys a warning. We were expecting a little bit of a dip on NIO back down to the 5.5 area. Had we gone to bounce, we could have turned back up. And if we lost support there, we'd be looking for a dip back down towards where this gap fill happens to be, around the 5.25 area. So with that being said, what happened to NIO was we failed to get that bounce, and the share price remained bearish once again, which goes to show that we're just all over the place, going back and forth and back and forth. The question now remains, what's going to be affecting the markets? Right now, we're going to be looking for some interesting volatility because we have big earnings coming out. I'll be talking more about how this could end up affecting the markets once we get more details about how things are going. With that being said, guys, now let's just focus on earnings and what's happening with the other factors before I break down more details about NIO. Yes, NIO looks a little bit more bearish right now, but I will break down more information a little bit later. So for today, electronic technology was a little bit weaker, and we saw technology services lead the market up. However, most sectors were very mixed. Finance was kind of flat, whereas retail and others were very, very weak. So we saw some weakness today in the markets, and we ended up getting a bit of a sell-off towards the end of the day. It's very interesting because the market started pumping towards the end of the day yesterday because it was in anticipation of Google's earnings, and they had good earnings. However, today, the market ended up selling off in anticipation of earnings, and we ended up not getting the best of earnings. So it's almost as if everything is predetermined. You guys can see right over here. For right now, we're looking at Microsoft, Meta, and Coinbase as the main three to be announcing earnings. I'm going to talk about these first. For now, though, just know that Coinbase is more bearish. The reason for this is because even though we had a net income of about $75 million or a 28 cents a share for the quarter after a loss of $2.27 million. Overall, EPS and revenues was not that bad for us. We had a pretty close estimates overall. However, because of the fact that their transaction revenue was down $483 million, that's the reason why we ended up seeing things end up dipping. Also, their subscription and services revenue fell by about $556 million, down 7%. That's why we ended up seeing the share price dumping, despite the fact that their EPS revenue was not too bad. So that's why we saw Coinbase down. The first one is red. The second one is Facebook. It's also down despite having a decent EPS and revenue. And just to double check, let me just show you Meta real quick. So if you look at Meta, this is currently, at the time I'm recording this, we are still a little bit down. We're down almost 3% right now. Not the best of news for Meta investors and traders. Meta is down because of the fact that although we beat on EPS and revenue, there was some talk about how there's going to be increasing expenditures for their AI developments. So because of increased AI talks and other factors like that, it has led to a bit of a sell-off. So you guys can see right over here, the total cost of about $23.2 billion and capital expenditure of $9.2 billion is what is worth noting. Although there's a slight improvement, the expenses remain very, very big, and there is going to be a warning. So you guys can see it right over here. There's a warning of significant acceleration infrastructure expenses for next year. So that's the one thing that caused investors to end up selling their shares. That's why there was a bit of a sell-off, at least for Facebook/Meta. Then there's Microsoft. Looking at this so far, they announced their earnings, which weren't actually too bad. They ended up doing relatively well with a beat on EPS. Revenue was also not too bad at about $65.6 billion. That's what they're saying. That's what their guidance is with those numbers. But the issue with that is that despite their guidance being above expectations, there are some fears about AI-driven costs as well, and other factors like that are leading to a bit of a sell-off. So I'll have to watch and see how this ends up going, at least for them. Now, on top of that, let me just make it clear right now, despite earnings coming out, we're down 3% on Microsoft. So big tech are selling off. So I do anticipate some downwards pressure for tomorrow as the big stocks are slowing down, and this could lead to some downside in the market for tomorrow. Now, there is one more factor. We have the PCE data report coming out tomorrow morning. So we're expecting PCE month over month to be around 0.1 to 0.2%, the same as before. And then year over year for all items, the same thing at 2.1%. So basically, we're expecting those to be the same. We're expecting core to be essentially the same year over year. So that's what we're going to be looking out for. Do we get the same numbers as before? But just to make it very, very clear and simple, we have initial jobless claims and PCE numbers that might cause volatility before market open tomorrow. Even if we do pop a bit, it does look like there's going to be some downwards pressure. The market's not as greedy as before. We're getting closer to neutral. Greed is now slowing down, and we're not extremely greedy anymore. And then the put to call option ratio is starting to uptrend. This could lead to a little bit more downside. Even the VIX is increasing, bouncing off its key EMAs. So as far as NIO goes, there was an announcement they unveiled their 2600th power swap station. And also there's some talk about how, they got a buy rating from some analysts from DBS. However, that wasn't really enough for NIO. It just caused a temporary pump only for us to start dipping because we're lacking volume, and there are still more sellers who are present because we're not getting enough volume to really start this thing to push upwards. We got some good ratings from Maguire, JP Morgan, and DBS, but so far, it wasn't really enough to help this thing continue to push. The price-price ratio is still kind of dipping a bit, and historically, Thursdays tend to be green only about 49% of the time. So there is a risk of us potentially dipping, so just keep that in mind. So that being said, what do I see for NIO? The answer is we look a little bit more bearish here. We could rebound tomorrow morning to retest 5.45 to 5.5 before we continue lower, but then I expect the gap of 5.25 or below. So I think we're going to be hitting 5.25 or below that for a little bit of a dip. That's the most likely case in my personal opinion. As far as SPY goes, we look a little bit more bearish. Now we have resistance at 580, but we could be dipping all the way down to about 578. So if that ends up failing, we're looking for a dip back down towards 575. SPY is at risk of dipping because of the fact that big tech are selling off. There could be a little bounce with PCE data coming up, but the odds do favor us continuing to dip. So I anticipate some downside, guys, and we are at risk of testing 578, if not below that. So that looks a little bit more bearish. ES looks more bearish. We're at risk of coming down to the lower 5800s, 5830s likely coming. For Nvda, if we don't hold above 138, I do see a risk of us coming down towards 130. Just to double check this gap fill will take us down to like 135. So look for 138.5 to 138 as our support. If that fails us, we're looking for 135. For Bitcoin, we're making lower highs right here. We could be dipping a little bit lower towards 71,500, if not 70,800. So there's a risk of slowing down and continuing to fall. So watch to see if that ends up being the case. As far as Tesla goes, we look a little bit more bearish. We're going to be looking for a target of 255 at our 20 EMA. If that does not hold, our imbalance takes us down to about 253. And then if that fails us, I think we come all the way down towards very close to 250. That's where this next previous resistance becoming support zone is going to be. So 250, then 244 are going to be our targets. So I do anticipate some downside for Tesla. NQ is dipping right here. If we don't get back above 20,500, we're looking for a dip down towards 20,400. The QQQ looks more bearish. We got to hold above 494. Otherwise, this gap is going to get filled. And we're looking for 492 and 490 as our potential targets. Apple looks a little bit more bearish. We're looking for 230 as our support. If it does not hold, we're looking for 228. And then, like I said about NIO, this is going to get dragged down, potentially down to the lower $5 area as the market is selling off. Could balance before it sees more downside after that. As far as others, such as the IWM or the Russell 2000 end up going, it's basically or essentially the same thing. So I anticipate that this could slow down back down to 220 as time goes on. We still have this gap to fill. So if 221 holds us, we could attempt to push for 223. But if we don't end up breaking and holding above 222, I do anticipate 220s next, and potentially the gap fill below if that ends up failing. For Coinbase, we look more bearish right now. We're looking for 200 as our support after the double top. Earnings were not that great for them. We're still getting a sell-off after earnings have come out. So with that being said, we could be dipping for 200, if not 192 if that fails us. Amazon's dipping to about 188. So it's actually losing 190. If 188 does not hold us, we're looking for 187.5. Then the gap fill down to 186. So there's a risk of downside on Amazon. For others out there, we have Meta, which is right now, it's been selling off. We're going to be watching to see how well this could hold up. With increases potentially in their infrastructure costs and then other costs for AI growth, there is a risk of it coming back down to about 575. We'll see if 580 holds or not. Otherwise, it could dip a little bit more. I do want to call out Microsoft, however. This is selling off a little bit more aggressively. We're down almost 4% now. So that is not the best of signs. We could be dipping closer to this like 412 area, if not below that. And last but not least, because big tech is selling off, Google's following the trend. We start off with a nice pump only to dip back down. So it could be returning back down to about 175, then 172. So look for that potential downside. The VIX is breaking out right now as the market is selling off. So I do see a risk of downside. It is possible the market pops again, even with PCE. We'll have to see if that ends up being the case. But then there's a risk of us continuing to fall as time goes on. So watch and see how things end up going, guys. I just want to say once again, I really appreciate you guys so much for listening. I will be back tomorrow for another update, but just know that as far as NIO goes, there is that risk of downside, and it's getting closer to the low fives to fill that gap below. It is not, however, the end of the world, so do not worry, do not be too concerned, and we will see how things end up going. I thank you all so much for listening. Please have a great day. I'll see you guys tomorrow, and peace out.